We are now looking forward to Professor Sajeev Job's sort of a talk on supply chain management, and just to talk about another hat of Professor Sajeev George. He's also a proud father of alumni of global management program. So towards the end, we'll also speak to him about his view as a parent of a student who has done this program in the past. Over to you, Professor Sajeev.
Thank you, Debraj. Thank you, everyone. Hello, welcome everyone to the session once again. It's my pleasure to interact. I hope I'm audible. Am I audible to everyone?
Yeah. Yes.
My pleasure to interact with the GMP students as well as the aspirants of this unique program from PGDM. In fact, my engagement with the GMP program has been quite long. I think right from the time it started at SPJMR with the name PGCIM, Postgraduate Certification in International Management. So very happy to see the progress made by the GMP program over the years. In fact, I got the opportunity to teach operations and supply chain management courses for many batches. And as Debraj has rightly said, off late, I also got got to play the role of a proud parent of a GMP student. So needless to say, my experience with GMP so far has been absolutely awesome. So first of all, let me thank my faculty colleagues, professors Debraj and Milind, who are leading this program, and definitely Deepali and others in the program office to have given me this opportunity to do this master class in supply chain management. And thanks, Debraj, for the introduction. You have been very generous in your words about me. So I'd possibly take around half an hour or so to talk about the theme, and then shall spend some time to take questions from you on the theme and also about my experience with GMP. So let me first try to share my screen. I hope you are able to see my screen.
Yes, Professor.
Okay, good. So it's about supply chain. Today's theme is about supply chain, and we'll talk about its evolution and maybe something about the future challenges too, in a very, very brief way in this half an hour. So when you talk about supply chain, of course, I'm sure everybody has heard, everybody knows this, everybody has heard of this term. So definitely different things would come to each one of you in your mind when you say supply chain. So, but everybody knows that supply chain has maybe multiple businesses coming into picture. When we have just one single firm, we don't normally talk about supply chain. So when we have two or more firms, then only we can possibly meaningfully talk about supply chain. So when you look at supply chain, basically, it is how to add superior value for a customer. That is the main objective anyway. And there are different processes, again, owned by different business organizations in the supply chain. How do you integrate all of them together so that finally you add superior value for the customer? I think that's what the objective is. So how do you design the supply chain? How do you plan? How do you coordinate and also improve various processes where the ownership is not concentrated in one single firm? You have a number of business organizations and it becomes very maybe challenging to integrate them. So various processes we have. I'm sure all of you would have heard of the processes shown here: sourcing, procurement. They are mostly, if you look at manufacturing firm as a focal firm, sourcing and procurement might come as upstream processes. So they are definitely part of supply chain. Then of course the transportation, inbound logistics, outbound logistics, all those kind of things. Transportation, storage, warehousing, inventory management, customer service, returns and repairs, all those kind of things. So supply chain encompasses all these various processes which are required to add value for the customer. And when you say value for the customer, I think that itself could be different, the way you look at value. So what benefits you possibly give to the customer and what the customer is paying for it. I think this is the way one would possibly want to look at value. So that means value can be defined in a number of different ways. In supply chains, you may have different types of value addition that might be happening by different firms in the supply chain. So some of them may be transforming. So that is, if you look at a manufacturer, it's basically transformation, where you talk about raw material being transformed into some kind of finished product. So where transformation could be one way to add value. It need not be always stage in terms of material transformation. It could sometimes be transforming in terms of the place, in terms of moving material from one place to another. There is some value that you're adding to the customer, and possibly even for storage and such kind of things again. So various, say, entities in the supply chain, some of them might be most predominantly adding value in terms of transformation. Is more in manufacturing, raw material being transformed into finished product. It could sometimes be like an R&D firm, where it is basically trying to solve some problems, or some consulting firm, or you talk about some design and things of that kind, where basically it involves diagnostic aspects, and you're trying to solve certain problems. So which again is adding value for customer. If you look at that from a service perspective, hospitals could be some of them. So where we talk about adding value for customer in terms of solving certain problems with the customer. And sometimes it could also be as a mediator between two entities. So where it could sometimes be maybe enabling certain transactions, or the entity might be basically bringing two or more parties together, or this entity might sometimes be pooling the resources so that the risk is mitigated and things of that kind. So there are several ways in which a firm might be adding value in the supply chain. So that is something which might be interesting. So there is a place for different types of firms in a supply chain so that you add superior value for customer. So when you look at supply chain management, of course, the supply chain has been existing from very, very long time. But I think people have been talking about supply chain management from early 1990s. Of course, due to some obvious reasons, everybody would have heard of Ford, Henry Ford assembly line and all that, where they had a lot of difficulties in terms of, though it was a great innovation in terms of making automobile or cars affordable to maybe a common man or common middle-class American. Still, the problem was it was highly vertically integrated. So where the flexibility was very, very low. So which basically resulted in when you want to possibly respond to the changing needs of the customer, the vertically integrated firms found it very, very difficult to do that. So contributing the trend, of course, is definitely trying to reduce cost. There is no doubt about that. When you integrate different firms in the supply chain, you possibly have maybe an opportunity to reduce costs. One of the main drivers for supply chain management is advances in information technology, because that helped, say, firms to integrate. Integrating is something that very, very challenging, right? You need a lot of information sharing, and without information technology advances, one cannot possibly think about effective supply chain management. So advances in information technology help to say bring this philosophy of supply chain management further. And of course, various other say reasons, such as the transportation methods, the global say supply chains, outsourcing, various other kind of things. And of course, last but not the least, customers became much, much more demanding. Gone are the days when you could just deliver the same product to the customer, where I think Henry Ford seemed to have said that I can give you any color as long as it is black, something like that, you know. So where he did not have much of flexibility. So now you need to respond to the changing needs of the customer much, much more than before. And there, the supply chains or integrating different firms in the supply chains help in responding to the change in needs of the customer in a much better way. So if you look at the change in paradigm, the old paradigm is the Henry Ford paradigm, where you talk about a highly vertically integrated firm, where In fact, Henry Ford owned the rubber plantation for making the tires of the cars of the Ford Henry Ford T model car. So which basically means that one single firm owning most of the value addition of the entire things needed to produce a product. But that doesn't work nowadays. Nowadays, you know that more and more outsourcing happens. So many companies, if you look at automobile manufacturer, what they possibly do might be just the final assembly and design and marketing, and rest of the things might all be outsourced to partners. So the new paradigm that say change this vertical integration to kind of horizontal integration, divide and conquer kind of a thing. Divide the value addition to different smaller and smaller say parts, and then integrate them together. So firms in a supply chain that way focuses on activities and areas of specialization where they develop some core competencies in that area, and they enter into trust-based voluntary relationship with the upstream and downstream firms, and then you integrate all of them together so that you add superior value for customer. And that is possibly the new paradigm that you see in the business these days. So supply chains are competing more than firms competing. You possibly also think about competition between supply chain. I think that is the change in paradigm that you have seen. Yeah. So if you look at this, it's kind of a network. Supply chain itself, it's a large network of relationships where we have, if you look at maybe a firm, maybe a specific firm, if you look at, you can possibly talk about upstream and downstream. So you have an integrated enterprise one side as a specific firm where you have procurement and logistics and manufacturing and all those kind of things, the functions that you need to do. And you have a supply network that you need to manage. You have different tiers of supplier. We talk about the first tier supplier, second tier supplier, third tier supplier, and so on. So at the upstream, you have a supplier network. And downstream, you also have a distribution network. You sometimes talk about entities such as distributor and then wholesaler and retailer. And then finally, it comes to the end customer and so on. And there are different flows that happen. Mostly we talk about three important flows. We talk about the material flow, talk about that means the product flow, basically, mostly happening from upstream to downstream. Then we talk about flow of information and, of course, flow of cash. So these are the three most important flows, and you need to effectively and efficiently manage this flow, all these flows, so that you're adding a superior value for a customer. I think that's what the challenge in supply chains, and it is very, very difficult. In fact, you know how difficult to integrate even the functions of a business. Sometimes in many companies, marketing and operations, or marketing and finance, you don't have enough integration between them. And here we are talking about inter-business organization, inter-firm, say, integration. So which is something very, very, say, complex. To what extent can you integrate the various entities, various processes that you have in the supply chain? And that possibly is the challenge that supply chains will keep having. And when you talk about supply chains, you cannot possibly think about the same supply chain being used for all different types of products, right? There are different types of products. There are sometimes we talk about make to stock kind of products. Then there are say products which are made to order. There are engineered to order kind of things which are highly customized and so on. So which means the supply chains that you need to deliver different types of products are also different. So if you look at products on a very, very broad, high level view of products, one can possibly classify products into two categories: functional products or commodity products one side, and the other side you can possibly talk about say products which are maybe innovative in nature, say fashion products for that matter, where we talk about the life cycle of the product being very short. At the same time, the demand is highly fluctuating. So if you look at maybe even a high-end, say, electronics products, maybe smartphones, they all come under that category where we have high fluctuations in demand and the life cycle is being short. So one can talk about maybe innovative products there. And if you look at maybe cement and steel and say chemicals and even FMCG for that matter, most of them would come under functional products or commodity products. So in the supply chain that you need to design for different types of products could be different. One size doesn't fit all. So that means in the case of commodity products or in the case of functional products, the most important thing is how do you make sure that you minimize the cost, how to deliver the product to the customer at the lowest cost. So cost minimization takes the front seat. So that's why we talk about efficient supply chains there. So functional, say products would need supply chains that are efficient. The first focus is how to reduce cost. So various stages of supply chain, the challenge is how to possibly add value with with spending less and less resources, or rather reducing costs further and further. But when you talk about products that are innovative or fashion products, there possibly responsiveness becomes a first priority. How do you respond to the changing needs of the customer? Because you can't, if you produce products that cannot sell, it's a huge cost for you, right? Where you talk about what you call, sometimes you may have to sell it at a much lower price. If the season for fashion products, we know about that. If this once the season is over, you may have to sell the product at a much lower price. Where we talk about markdowns and things of that kind, which is a huge cost. So you may have to even sell it at a price which is lower than the cost price. So that means the cost of mismatch between capacity and demand is very, very high for innovative products. So the most important thing is how can you be more responsive? So you need to design supply chains accordingly, whether you are handling a functional product or whether you are handling innovative product, you possibly have different challenges to face. The priorities, it is not that if you look at innovative products, cost is not important, but maybe the priorities, so the trade-off that you see in different types of supply chains could be different for different types of products. So going further, yeah, how will these supply chains change? Because various processes we discussed in terms of the main processes, sourcing and production and logistics and all that. So that how are things changing? So sourcing, there is a lot of maybe global sourcing and things that are happening. So because there are a lot of advantages of maybe going to another geographies, and at the same time there are also a lot of risks and all that. So supply chains, of course, will keep evolving with respect to its sourcing, strategic way of sourcing and procurement and all that. Even production, there are a lot of changes that are happening. So where the technology that is used for production would keep changing. So how can possibly be having more flexible kind of manufacturing processes, various other technologies that are being developed that are changing the production aspects of supply chain. Logistics, definitely a lot of changing happening in mixed model and multi-modal transportation and various other aspects of that. Risk management is a major area of supply chain, because there are a lot of risks that supply chains face in different processes. How do you manage them? Definitely could be a challenge. So that keeps changing. In future, I think there'll be a lot of emphasis on risk management. I'll possibly come to that later little briefly. And the regulatory requirements, that definitely is something that companies keep worrying about, in terms of many companies have now more protectionist kind of policies and things of that kind. The regulations need to be, again, the compliance to those kind of things might be another challenge. The offerings itself, you might need to think about it differently. And last but not the least, all supply chains, ultimately the main challenge is how do you manage the talent for supply chain? Because ultimately it is people who make the supply chains work, and what type of talents you need. Because nowadays you need a lot of people with different domain experience, maybe people who have a lot of analytical skills, data scientists, a lot of data scientists you need for say different roles in supply chain. So what kind of talent you need, that again could be something which would be very different in the future, which again gives you a lot of opportunities to learn about new things and possibly also learn new skills which can help you to get maybe say geared up to take up roles in supply chains, which keeps changing fast these days.
Was Sajeev,
Yeah, sure.
how has COVID-19 influenced the supply chain management? Must have impacted to a large extent.
True, absolutely. In fact, that's what I possibly might be coming in this slide itself, because there are a lot of risk. Yeah, in fact, when you talk about risk, there are different types of risk that we keep talking about. And one of the risks that you talk about is risk with respect to environment. And possibly the pandemic should be considered as one of the risks coming under the, and in fact, in environmental, say, aspects, again, there are so many different types of risk, and possibly, say, various disruptions that you possibly could be, say, looking at. Pandemic, definitely one among them. So how do you manage? How do you how do you achieve better resilience? Because I think resilience has become a very, very important word for supply chain these days. Where how are you going to respond to this kind of changing needs and changing environment? And lot of things happen in all the various processes that we have discussed about in supply chain, and that will keep changing, and that comes under risk. And there are different ways in which possibly supply chains would need to look at that. I think all the various things that we saw here, everything would possibly be affected by COVID-19. There is no doubt about that. And different supply chains may have different challenges. But I think, Professor Debraj, your question is very, very relevant. I think many companies are still, say, struggling to get maybe geared up to this risk, which they have not envisaged in any way. So that is something which might be very, very interesting. But if you look at this, if you look at the future of supply chains, it is moving from just, of course, initially it was just a functional perspective where you look at just procurement and manufacturing, logistics as the main functions. And then it further got maybe say expanded to look at integrating them. So the processes and resources that you need to integrate them. So that possibly is the second stage. And the third stage is in terms of the risk and the security. How do you manage? Because when you have a number of business entities coming into picture, the risk also becomes higher and higher. So how do you manage the risk and security issues in supply chain? I think that's a very, very huge area. And then, of course, beyond that, again, I think the current thinking in supply chain is more about sustainability, which encompasses all these things. So how can you design a sustainable supply chain? Because business continuity is so important. So sustainability in a number of different ways in terms of profit and in terms of, say, people, and also in terms of the planet. So we talk about the triple P model and things of that kind. So how do we gear up to that? I think that is what the future of supply chains would be, sustainability. But the risk in various aspects of processes, they all will come under, but and go much, much beyond when we talk about sustainability of supply chains. So I don't know whether I answered that question, Professor Debraj.
Yeah, absolutely, Professor. Right. Pritesh has a very interesting question. Pritesh, why don't you ask? Just put a question on the chat, Pritesh.
Please go ahead. I'm not seeing the chat.
Sir, my question is, as semiconductor issue is a big challenge for manufacturing companies, especially for car manufacturing and electronics companies. So how supply chain will, how companies will find a way forward to it? Like how they can arrange the supplies?
True. I think that's a very complex issue. I think there is a worldwide, there is a shortage happening. It's not just one or few companies facing that. So that is something which has disrupted overall, I think, manufacturing, automobile manufacturing in different parts of the world. I think that is being addressed in a very large scale, say, in a broader scale. But of course, if you look at a firm level or in a supply chain level, it could be more in terms of how do we, say, envisage all these kind of different challenges. So what kind of risk? Because when you talk about risk, that involves all these disruption problems. So because many things can disrupt the supply chains. So this non-availability, when you have, say, supply issues, supply risk, because basically in all supply chains, the basic problem is how do you integrate supply with demand? So that is the core of supply chain management, because there's always a mismatch between supply and demand. So this will always be a challenge, but some companies perhaps might do better than others because they may have different ways in which they might mitigate this kind of risk, maybe by more trust-based long-term relationship with suppliers, or sometimes when you have maybe strategic suppliers, and when you have long-term relationship, that might help you to mitigate some of these problems better. But of course, that will remain as a challenge, and this is a problem faced by companies as a whole, which I think different companies are trying to solve in their own way. Right? So look at this in terms of major areas. All the 4 areas are important. I think the question that you asked might possibly be more with respect to environmental events, where you talk about the pandemic and disruptions due to various other environmental issues. But along with that, you also have risks with respect to compliance. So the supply chains will have to comply with the regulatory frameworks and various other standards, and say the different standards and ISO and various different things that you have. So compliance to those standards, compliance to specifications, definitely that will remain as a challenge. Performance challenge, of course, in terms of the delivery speed, in terms of the cost, in terms of quality, various aspects of performance, all of them will have to be taken into account, and that will always remain to be one of the risks. And last but not the least, the financial risk, different levels of financial risk, which could be again market related and so on. So how do you look at both the supply side and also market side to mitigate the 4 different categories of, in fact, each one you can again classify risk into maybe 10 or 15 different risks coming under compliance, coming under performance, coming in environmental events, say financial aspects and so on. So even one can add maybe risk relating to market and so on. So many risks can be identified, and how companies could work for mitigating some of this. Some of the things you're going to learn in the courses relating to supply chain management in the GMP program. So this is something that I already said. I will conclude, try to conclude my session as fast as possible. So environmental concerns, it could include things such as climate change, the energy use, the contamination of the environment, so the depletion of resources and so on. So all those things. Green supply chains, we keep talking about various aspects of supply chain: green design, green procurement, green production, various other aspects of supply chain. How can you be more environmental friendly? I think that is a major challenge. So how do you design processes to use more environmental friendly inputs and produce outputs that can possibly be recycled? So we talk about many a times we talk about closed loop supply chain. So how can you have that feedback loop in the supply chain? So there's a return process in the supply chain. So how do you talk about the recycling and make sure that the supply chain remains green and let's not contaminate the environment, which is a major challenge. And beyond this, one has to possibly look at sustainability in terms of the social aspect of supply chain. I think the triple P model that I just mentioned before is very important. You have to one need to look at supply chain performance in these 3 different aspects: people, profit, and planet. The triple P model would be the future way in which one might be looking at supply chain performance. The metrics that you might need to develop or need to implement for success in supply chain would possibly encompass all the 3 aspects, major aspects of supply chain, and that might remain as a challenge. And further challenges, of course, all of us know that you need to look at the innovations, new things in terms of new products introduction and things of that kind. So product innovation and also process, both the product and process innovation. I mean, how do you produce a product? That is what you call a process. So how do you innovate your process and products? That will remain to be a challenge. And definitely improving efficiency, reducing cost, important aspect, important challenge that will remain so. And definitely beyond that, also enhancing the responsiveness, enhancing your resilience in the face of the risk that you face. So how do you also build a more resilient supply chain? And that will remain to be a challenge. And there are again more new maybe forms of supply chain coming. Where trying to reduce the length of the supply chain. You may have 4 or 5 entities, like there is a supplier, 3 or 4 tiers of supply chain, supplier, manufacturer, distributor, wholesaler, retailer, and so on. And that model might change, and you may have possibly a supply chain with lesser number of entities. So the supply chain, for that matter, might have inherently lesser number of entities. And there are also platform-based models and all that. So e-commerce could also be helping to reduce the intermediaries and trying to improve the efficiencies and improving the responsiveness of supply chain. And better integration, this will always remain as a challenge. How can you have better integration among different partners of the supply chain? So how can you integrate with your supplier, something of that kind? So the integration will definitely remain to be a challenge. And nowadays, you know that many organizations are going towards a digital transformation of supply chains with various technologies such as data analytics, blockchain, automation, AI and ML, and all those kind of things. Many of these things you're going to learn in the GMP program. So that's again something very, very relevant because many of these things are going to be so much, say, multidisciplinary in that sense. And to conclude, perhaps I can only say that ultimately the SCM supply chain management challenge for the future will remain to be how do you address the mismatch between capacity and demand, or supply and demand? How do you address this mismatch? How do you integrate capacity with demand in a better way in this VUCA world? I think all of you have heard of this term VUCA, where you talk about volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous kind of environment. How do you address this challenge? And that is what I think the future is going to be. Thanks for the patient listening. I'll be happy to answer questions. Thank you so much. Let me stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sajeev. Excellent. In a short time, you have given a very overview of this vast topic. So Devansh has already a question in the chat. Devansh, you want to ask the question? Devansh Sharma?
Yes, am I audible?
Yes, audible.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you, Sajeev, sir, for the session, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask a question.
Yes, Devansh, go ahead.
Yes, sir. My question is so what are there specific talents or qualities that the schools and companies are looking for in a student? Like some prerequisites that the student need to have before joining the program, and some qualities that a student need to have for the program.
So Debraj, you want to address that question or?
Yeah, so related to the program, if you're asking, so if you look at, so we have a process of the interview, and before that, we are looking at your scores of CAT, GMAT, GRE. So, and then there is also second round of interview where we are looking at from the partner school. But broadly, if you look at, we're looking at learnability. Yeah. So how fast can you learn, and how eager are you to learn? Because in those 6 months you will learn 30 different subjects at SPJMR, and then you'll go to partner school and learn. So how is the learnability? Are you eager to learn? Are you a quick learner? Those are some of the things we are looking at broadly.
Thank you. That's all. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, another question Sahil wants to ask. Sahil?
Sir, apologies for sending the direct message and not on chat. Sir, actually, I wanted to ask that the cost of freight is going uncontrollably high, and it is actually hurting a lot of margins. So how should companies ensure they manage to survive this situation? Because of container shortage and port clogging, it's really causing issues in the global supply chain.
What is the specific thing that you said initially? I did not hear that.
Sir, the
properly.
cost of freight, I wanted to ask. The cost of freight,
okay.
it is going really high. Yes.
Okay. Absolutely.
Yes. So
that's
how should companies? Yes.
True. That's why different companies may adopt different strategies. I think even as countries, people may have different ways in which you might want to possibly have more of the supply chain activities happening within the country itself. You talk about Make in India, and you talk about various aspects of, say, how to consolidate things within. So that might be one way in which you might want to maybe reduce such kind of risk and the cost associated with that. But definitely the cost could again be contained in effective and efficient management of activities, right? So that's where the supply chain management practice and theory would help, because the cost overall might increase, but there are still, you can be competitive, right? So number of different strategies can be used to be competitive in that kind of environment too. So which could possibly be in terms of how do we integrate various functions in the supply chain? How do you have the right partners? How do you get the right people to work for the supply chain? All these things can help to enhance your competitiveness in spite of all those things happening, because all those things are everywhere going to happen. So which anyway, you don't have much of a control. So, but how do you innovate so that you are able to manage those things in an effective and efficient way as compared to competition? That's what possibly will give you the competitive advantage. Yes, so Debraj, would you like to add something more to it?
Yeah, so if you look at the freight rise, so there is a huge supply demand issue, and suddenly, after the pandemic, the demand has risen, especially in the Western countries, and there is a shortage of ships because ships were, the building of the ships didn't happen. Also, the containers, not the ships only, the containers also, there is a, not a matching. So most
Yes,
of
sir.
the containers have reached to the US or European coast from China or India, but the reverse is not there. So, some of the containers are stuck in some ports, and maybe it's a temporary, and things will move up again, because now everybody is getting into those, and even government is now talking about taking some action against some of the shipping lines which are not coming to India and stuff like that. I see Rishikesh hand up also. Rishikesh, you have a question?
Yeah. Thanks for giving the opportunity. It was a very good session. I have one question. So when I went to the curriculum, it talks about supply chain and operations altogether. Whereas if I see there is a certification available, CSCP, okay, Certified Supply Chain Professional. So how do we rate this GMP program against CSCP? What is the age or the point we have in this program? So I want to understand from that perspective. And secondly, what are the points we have post doing this GMP program? So just wanted to get this clarity.
I mean, as far as those certifications are concerned, they have maybe limited maybe value at this stage. Of course, some companies may, other things being same, might give some importance to those kind of certification, because otherwise, and again, if you want to do a certification, the learnings that you have may also help. Maybe you might need much less preparation if you want to do that, but we don't normally encourage people to do that kind of certifications when you do your GMP program, or your whichever program you select. This is something that you can possibly do at different points of time anyway. So it may not be so much an important thing as far as maybe a fresh candidate or a candidate doing a GMP program. At that point of time, it may not be so much important. But if you feel that that is important at some point, you always have the opportunity to do it. So this is, again, supply chain management is normally as an extension of operations management. You normally have a operations management course in the GMP program, which could possibly be a compulsory mandatory course. But along with that, you also have, of course, that itself contains a lot of supply chain aspects. But there will also be some electives which you might be able to take, which might go much more further into some of the specifics of supply chain management. But there may not be so much of value in those kind of say certifications, because the courses that you do go much more into depth than those kind of certifications. This is my experience. I don't know, Professor Debraj or anybody would like to maybe add some more things about it.
Yeah, if I want to just add on, if you look at the global management program at SPJM, so you are doing multiple subjects, because supply chain management is holistic. It's about integration of all the other subjects. So when you study at SPJM, you are not only doing global production management, you have a course on decision science, you have course on supply chain management, and plus if you want to further specialize, some of the partner schools they have also, provide a master's in global supply chain management. But in addition to that, you're learning all the other subjects, plus the interaction of, with the very bright students from across India. When you studied SPJMR, and when you go to partner schools, you will study with, students from multiple countries. Yeah. Not only Indians and US people, but also people from many other countries who go to those colleges. So it's a very much bigger thing, and certification could be very specific. Yeah. That can give you a particular skill, but not the overall maybe picture.
I'd like to add. So to answer your question from a slightly different point of view, so GMP is just a 6 months, which is a semester kind of a thing before you enter the partner schools for specialization. So if you see for supply chain, we have two colleges, which are universities rather, which are offering the course. So once you do the course from them, you complete, you get a degree from them. So it will be a MS in global supply chain management from USC or from Robert H. Smith School of Business. So the value that that degree holds, of course, is nowhere comparable to the certificate that we're talking about. And like Professor George said, this is the certification is good for while you're already working in that field and you want to enhance your skills. Whereas this degree would help you open up many more avenues for you. So if you can just check the rankings for USC, I mean, if you're doing a supply chain from USC, companies are waiting to hire you because the ranking is very high. If you have any further questions, you can always connect with me. My number is there on the chat, and we can connect you to the students who are studying in these colleges, so you can get much more clarity.
Yeah,
If I may add on that, I'm Govind.
Yeah, Govind. So Govind, I'll just introduce him quickly. He's an alumnus of ours. He's now in Netherlands. And yes, you are into supply chain, right, Govind?
Yeah. That's why when I saw the advert on LinkedIn, it really intrigued me. I wanted to understand the perspective of academia. What do they think about future of supply chain? So adding to the question which someone just asked, so GMP is not only about theoretical concepts. I can tell from my experience, it's more about application of knowledge as well. Application of knowledge through some simulation games. I still remember one of the simulation sessions which Professor George had organized, Roots Beer, if I'm not mistaken, it was the name.
That's so nice, you still remember that.
Yeah, of course, sir. It was really interesting. And second thing, you will also learn through case studies. That's one of the salient features of GMP. I myself am doing course of CPIM right now. It's organized by APIX, very similar to CSCP. And when I'm going through the books, I can see it's very theoretical. And the main objective of doing these courses is to align yourself and make yourself acquainted with common language, which is spoken across different industries and organizations. Because sometimes you call something in your terms, but that's not the standard. So CSCP or CPIM is something for professionals which have had experience, whereas GMP is for someone who wants to gain some experience, want to understand and apply concepts hands-on. So that was one of the points I wanted to share with you guys.
Great, Govind. So great to see you. Yeah, one of our alums here. So Professor Sajeev, if I have to ask you some questions, in terms of, after, studying in this area of, operations and supply chain management, what are the typical career, profiles which students generally have, and, and what are the opportunities in this area?
Yeah, I mean, if I want to answer that, of course, they might need to do further. Yeah, you mean to say after a further maybe completing
No,
their
I'm asking
degree
you,
in
what
supply
are the career
chain?
opportunities, so after
For
doing such
supply chain.
courses? So in the corporate world, what type of profiles generally, are there in supply chain?
Right. So there are many things. So of course, you might work in different areas of supply chain. So some people might be related to logistics. So some people might be in supply chain planning, demand planning, forecasting, such kind of things. So some people may be into warehousing and such kinds, various things of that kind. And many people might be into e-commerce. So there are various areas, and I think that's what it's a very broad area that way, because various different aspects of value addition you may possibly have chances to add value there. So I think the main, roles that people take up after supply chain, say specialization MBA, could be more supply chain planner, demand management or demand planner, say operations, say operations improvements, consulting kind of roles. So that's something that many people might face, or even in areas such as analytics and also there are a lot of what supply chain, the domain knowledge along with analytical skills. I think that is what makes people hotcakes there. If you have domain knowledge at the same time, also analytical skills, so then you can possibly become also say suitable for those kind of roles too. So number of different roles are there. So different companies may give different names for it, but in the upstream, downstream, so various roles people take up. E-commerce, supply chain, e-commerce, consulting, some of them definitely.
Great. So I think with booming e-commerce, there are huge opportunities in supply chain management.
Absolutely.
Now, Professor Sajeev, if I ask you your hat as a parent, where your daughter Preeti studied from this program. So can you tell us, what did she do before and after now, what is she doing? How has been the experience as a parent of a student?
Right. That's a good question. Thanks for asking that question, Mr. Debraj. So my daughter is from the GMP 2020 batch, January 2020 batch. This is a batch, I think, from which the US partner schools are also added into the program. So in fact, she did her first 2 months of the program in the in-person mode, and then the pandemic struck. So she finished the GMP by August 2020, and then subsequently she joined at the Brandeis International Business School in January 2021. That was, they call it the spring batch, 2021 spring batch. So she joined for MS in Business Analytics. So she, her background was engineer in electronics and telecommunication. So in fact, she moved to, in fact, her idea was to move to engineering management or something like that. She was also looking for other opportunities. But GMP became a preferred opportunity, though she in fact got admissions into good schools with her GRA score itself. I think she got admission in both the Northeastern and University of Southern California through her GRA score itself. But in fact, when we look back, we are very, very happy that we went through this GMP program because that gave her a good, great head start that way. The 6 months of GMP was extremely useful for her. That transformed her from kind of a shy and timid girl to much more confident, and she learned to be much more passionate and enjoy the things that she has been doing. And of course, Brandeis is also a great school. She's getting a lot of opportunities there. Apart from classes, she's doing a lot of work. So she's a TA for, I think, 2 or 3 courses. She's working at the office. She's doing some internship. Part of some of the projects that they have been doing. All of these things, she's also being paid for hourly basis and all that. So she's also making some money, at least a pocket money that she needs. She's making from the work that she's doing there, and that also giving her a lot of good exposure. So I think on average, she makes around $400 in a week with all these activities that she's doing. And she is also staying in a big house with the 4 other GMP students who also joined Brandeis. So in fact, there are a number of advantages that way. Of course, the fees also was less. I think she got, I think that's what mostly happens when you join through the GMP program. Your fees would be considerably less as compared to maybe when you join directly those schools for these programs. Then of course, you may get this familiar environment. As my daughter, she has now 4 people along with her staying in the same place. So the familiar environment helps. In fact, the faculty members also, she had interacted with many of them before itself. So that also helped a lot. And last but not the least, you have the foundations already ready. When you join there, you are going there after learning a lot of things like R and Python and various other courses in data analytics and data visualization and so many things he had done from the GMP program itself. And then she's finding the program so maybe much, much easier as compared to maybe her peers who had not done this. So these are some of the general things that I can say.
Yeah, very interesting. So because I've also taught her, and good to see her progress. And you mentioned she got some scholarships. So, so how much did she get? Some some scholarships.
I think she got a 55% fee waiver. 55% fee waiver. She only had to pay a fees of 45%. The original fees, whatever they had said, only 45% of that had to be paid. She got a 55% fee waiver. I think that happened for many other people also. I mean, somewhere in that range,
Yeah. And I think up to some people also got 100%. Over the years. So that's very interesting. Professor Sajeev, since you're wearing so many hats, if I ask you now, your hat as a professor, you have taught, multiple batches of GMP students, and you have also taught, different students at SPJMR or even beyond SPJMR. So what was your, sort of memories of teaching GMP batches, and anything distinct you remember about those batches?
So that's what I was so happy when just now Govind said that he remembered the simulation, because in fact, recent past, my interaction in GMP has come down a little because of my responsibilities in the other program that now I am part of the program leadership of the PGDM program. But in fact, earlier when this program started, I think that time I had much more interaction. And in fact, I have some personal contact with some of the students who have done GMP early days. So, I mean, I found this GMP program, the good thing is people are much more receptive that way. They all are possibly, they're taking much more risk as compared to maybe other programs, because this is a big decision that you're making. So, so the risk-taking ability of the GMP programs, possibly one should possibly say that they are higher risk takers, because they get much better exposure that way, because many of them get opportunity to go, of course, study in different countries and also work in different countries. So they tend to compare and contrast and all that. Other programs, they may only get limited exposure. Some of them might go for maybe some international immersion or maybe some exchange program. But this is very different. So they get this, and many of them may also compare and then say, the GMP experience, the professors and the faculty and even the academic experience here, possibly they may also rate very high, even when they compare with their experience elsewhere in those top business schools in the world. And so that way also, I think you see a lot of comparisons. And my interactions with the GMP had been really satisfying. Only I wish I could possibly take more sessions, more classes for GMP, but it has been really so satisfying experience for me so far.
Yeah, for future batches, we will not leave you. So we will,
thanks.
Get your time and request you to teach some courses. So, any more questions from the audience?
Ask a question. This is more from the parents' point of view. So because I interact with a lot of students as well as a parent, their concern is the placement. So you being a prof here in India, and you knew that a lot of opportunities were here available as well, where she could be placed by the college, and still you took the decision that she would join Brandeis. I mean, you jointly took that decision. So you can just please take us through, like, what were the points that you considered?
See, in my daughter's case, she was maybe very clear right from her early days that she wants to study in the US. So that is something that she was very clear about. So that is one part which, of course, the question was whether go for GMP or whether you do directly maybe through GRE and all that, directly join there for some MS programs there. But this was a kind of a very good decision in terms of, getting into the right kind of a program, because she was very confused. Like most of the engineering graduates, they possibly do not enjoy so much their engineering program, because many of them, they do it because they have to do it, right? Because after 12th standard, you think about what are the options, and many of them end up doing engineering for that matter. And many of them do not really enjoy the experience that they had in the engineering schools. So then the question is, how do you possibly move forward? So the number of different ways in which you might want to move forward. Some of them might want to take up some technical courses for post-graduation, the same similar field, or some of them might want to move into some other field. And she was very particular that she did not want to go further into electronics and telecommunication. She wanted to do something relating to possibly an interdisciplinary area of management and engineering, something like that. Then this came very, very useful. GMP had many different options to choose from. And then the analytics option was very, very maybe suitable for her. And the placement, of course, you have now possibility of getting placed there. And at the same time, if you want to come back here, you have still possibility of getting placed there. So you have the stamp of SPJMR, one of the top B schools in the country. At the same time, you also have an international, say, degree MS from a very good school in the US. So that is a double-edged kind of a sword, which can help you to get a place anywhere, right? You have possibility to place in India, or you have a possibility to be in US itself. I think that's something that is much, much more useful. There is no doubt.
Thank you so much.